I'm going now. Too late. Connoisseurs, it is I once again, the sanctimoniously notorious RMB. Wow, I got to tell you, I've been working hard on all these projects, trying to get things done, but man, the internet is a rocky place to be today. I feel like I'm trying to get to shore to go on some excursion 500 years ago, and I can't quite find somewhere to land because the surf is just too intense and the beaches are too rocky, and anywhere I set down, my boat is going to get shattered against the waves against the firmament. Anyway, it's boy, there's a lot of people talking today about Game of Thrones, actually about everything. I mean, it's really interesting that Game of Thrones is sort of, I think after The Last Jedi, the most divisive thing I've ever seen in fandom. And I have many different thoughts about it. People have been criticizing me about pointing alternative points of view, like diametrically opposed points of view on my Twitter feed. And that's kind of what I've been thinking about. But first, I want to welcome all of you imagination connoisseurs, to the Post-Geek Singularity community. And I have to say, because of my Godzilla posting on Friday night, I sailed past 10,000 subscribers, and I have a bunch of new people here. My YouTube analytics are now showing I have people coming here from different countries than ever before, and I want to thank everybody for that. And I want to remind everyone that this podcast is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. I love their products, and if you go to their website, getluckytiger.com, and you buy any products there, you get a 20% discount if you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity anytime you check out. And everyone knows I love their products. But anyway, I'm just stunned. And I'm going to say something right off the bat about last night's Game of Thrones. I liked it in a punk rock way. I even tweeted, I love this episode, hashtag our motto, Apocalypse Now, which is from one of my favorite movies of all time, Apocalypse Now, which is getting a new 4K release in August on disc. But boy, I've been reading a lot of stuff. I'm kind of addicted to reading people's responses. But I found a Twitter thread that I thought I would start off and share with everyone because it kind of leads into what I've been thinking about. And this comes from somebody I don't know. I was not following him. I read his thread, and I thought it was great. And I'm going to share it. It is a spoiler-free thread. So if you want to listen to this chat or listen to this, it's probably going to delve into spoiler territory, but this is a spoiler-free thread. And it comes from Twitter. It comes from Daniel Silvermint. No, I didn't ask him permission to read this on the air, but I figure since he posted it on Twitter, which is a public forum, all is fair game. You can find him at Daniel Silvermint. It's just like it says, capital D and then Silvermint. And he says, he starts this thread out by saying, want to know why Game of Thrones feels so different now? I think I can explain without spoilers. Now, this is a long thread, so I'm reading through this thread. It has to do with the behind-the-scenes process of plotters versus pantsters. Plotters versus pantsters. If you're not familiar with the distinction, plotters create a fairly detailed outline before they commit a single word to the page. Pantsers discover the story as they write it, often treating the first draft like one big elaborate outline. Neither approach is right. It's just a way to characterize the writing process. But the two approaches do tend to have different advantages. Because they have the whole story in mind, it's usually easier for plotters to deliver tighter stories and stick the landing when it comes to endings. But their characters can sometimes feel stiff, like they're just plot devices. Pantsers have an easier time writing realistic characters because they generate the plot by asking themselves what this fully realized person would do or think next in the dramatic situation the writer has dropped them in. But because pantsers are making it up as they go along, hence the name, they're flying by the seat of their pants, they're prone to meandering plots and can struggle to bring everything together in a satisfying conclusion. That's why a lot of writers plot their stories, but pants their characters. and used the second draft to reconcile conflicts between the two. What does this have to do with Game of Thrones? Well, George R.R. Martin is one of the most epic pantsers around. He talks about writing like cultivating a garden. He plants character seeds and carefully lets them grow and grow. That's why every plot point and fair in hindsight surprise landed with such devastating weight. Everything that happened to those characters happened because of their past choices. But it's also the reason why the narrative momentum of the books slowed over time. After the first big plot arc, Book 4 was originally going to skip ahead 5 years. But George R. R. Martin didn't know how to make the gap in action feel true to the characters of the world, so he eventually decided to just write his way through those 5 years instead, which meant planting more seeds and watching those grow. And suddenly his garden was overgrown and hard to prune without abrupt or forced resolutions. He had no choice but to follow each and every one of those plot threads, even when they didn't really matter to the story. And now that the plants were fully in control, he struggled to get some of the characters that had grown one way to go where they needed to go for the story. Danny getting stuck in Marine is the example he frequently cites. And because he had all of this story to cover and pay off, some of which was growing in the wrong directions and needed enough narrative space to come back around, he started increasing the number of books he thought would take him to complete the series. And, well, so the books the showrunners were adapting ran out. Now what? People assumed the show suffered because they didn't have George R. R. Martin's rich material to draw on anymore, as if the problem was that he's simply better at generating new plots than they are. But that's not what happened. For a season or two, the showrunners actually tried to take over management of George R. R. Martin's sprawling garden, with understandably mixed results. When that didn't work, they shifted their focus to bringing this huge beast in for a landing. They gave themselves a fixed endpoint, 13 episodes to the finale, and no more, and set about reverse engineering the rest of the story they wanted to tell. You see, I think the showrunners are not only plotters, they're ending-focused plotters by design. They want to deliver an ultimately satisfying experience. So, with only 2 sessions to work with, they started asking themselves what was left to do. What could they build with the pieces left in the box? What beats did they just have to include? What big moments did they want to deliver? Where should the characters end up? What did they think we, the audience, wanted to see on screen before the show came to an end? It was a Game of Thrones bucket list. And once they had that list, it was time to connect the dots to make it all happen. So they started maneuvering the characters into the emotional and literal places they needed to be for all those dots to connect up in the right way. That's why Game of Thrones feels different now. A show that had been about the weight of the past becomes about the spectacle of the present. Characters with incredible depth and agency, all the more rope with which to hang themselves, became pieces on a giant war map. Where once the characters authored their own terrible destinies, now they were forced to take uncharacteristic actions and make uncharacteristically bad decisions so the necessary plot points could happen and the appropriate stakes could be felt. Organic developments gave way to contrivance. Naturally paced character arcs were rushed. Living plants became puppets of the plot. The characters just weren't in charge anymore. The ending was. No one is to blame. Keeping a million plates spinning the way George R. R. Martin did is hard, and settling those plates down without breaking too many, which is what the showrunners had to do, is also really hard. Creation in general is hard. There's a reason writers have haunted eyes and always seem like they need a hug. Give everyone a break. But the shift in approach did have consequences. Is pantsing better than plotting? No. And this has nothing to do with which approach is right anyway. It's about the approach changing in the third act. That's the sort of thing audiences can feel happening, even if they can't put their finger on exactly why. The audience fell in love with one kind of show, but the ending is being imported from a different kind of show. Now, I happen to think the finale will stick the landing. It's what the showrunners have been building towards these past 2 seasons, after all. But to be satisfying, it matters how we get there, too. Treating the journey as equally important is how you get endings that feel earned. And it's how characters keep feeling real the whole way through, even though they're completing arcs some writer has chosen for them. By placing so much emphasis on the ending, the showrunners changed the nature of the story they were telling, meaning the original story and the original characters aren't the ones getting an ending. Their substitutes are. That is why no amount of spectacle or fan service can make this ending as satisfying as it should be. Resolutions invite us to consider the story as a whole, where it all started, where it all ended up, and we can feel the discontinuity in this one. I thought that was a tremendously cogent analysis for sort of my feelings about Game of Thrones, and I'll even go a little further. My Burnett axiom: never put your universe before your characters, has been what's happened in my mind, especially in these last few episodes of Game of Thrones. Why have I loved Game of Thrones? I loved Game of Thrones because despite its medieval trappings and the magic and the genre elements of it, basically it was about scheming characters. It was about all kinds of people swirling around in each other's orbits that they all had their various desires like we all do in real life. And we could recognize them. They were analogous. Sure, they were great epic characters, but for the most part, they were characters that were they were scheming. Their problems, even though set in this world, were basically with each other. And when Game of Thrones had a pattern, 10-episode seasons, and on the 9th episode, they would have a big epic battle. But that epic battle was always the results of what had happened with the machinations of the characters throughout the show. And it was just literally a physical manifestation of the emotions and the characterizations that we as viewers felt and fell in love with. And then it was back to the scheming. Characters like whatever Littlefinger was doing, or when Jon went beyond the wall and fell in love. I mean, they spent some time with Ygritte and did this kind of thing. I mean, it was a soap opera. It was a grand soap opera, and the characters were so interesting, and the stakes were so high on an emotional and personal level that we were completely invested. Now, in my mind, what Daniel Silverman is saying here is correct. What's happened is what we expected to be was those same interpersonal relationships creating the epic structure of what we were going to watch. We wanted to see the epic theater between our characters. The spectacle has never mattered in Game of Thrones. It was never why we tuned in. It wasn't why anyone tuned in. It was all about the character interplay. I mean, the most satisfying moments of Game of Thrones happened not on the battlefield, but in rooms where treachery occurred, where amazing events happened. The Red Wedding, for instance, no one saw it coming. It was not out on the battlefield. It was in a dining room, after all. Probably still the most shocking thing that ever happened on the show. For those of you who hadn't read the books, it happened at a dinner party. And if you go back and you pick out your favorite, like I think about my favorite movies, all of my favorite movies, The Godfather being one. There's no big action sequences in The Godfather. You could say that the elimination of the leaders of the 5 families at the end of The Godfather was epic, but it certainly wasn't spectacle based. It was a spectacle because we saw it all intercut together. It was still characters in rooms being dispatched. It wasn't on a battlefield. There wasn't a huge gun battle. And yet The Godfather remains one of the most compelling movies ever made, one of my favorite films ever made, and it's just like Game of Thrones. As Coppola said, it's about a king and his 3 sons. And I think that what we're seeing is the characters, especially last night, were lost. And the character decisions, which were usually the results of a slow burn. And there's people that will say, oh, okay, over the course of the series, there were hints dropped that certain characters would do what they did last night. I would argue that. I would counter that and say that isn't true. And having a 1-sentence occurrence of something 3 seasons ago is not foreshadowing. The great thing about Game of Thrones is the entire show was foreshadowing. You never knew what was going to happen from moment to moment to moment within the confines of the characters themselves. It was the people and their plight that was the most interesting. It's the same reason people read comic books. It's the same reason people watch soap operas. It's because it's the same reason we watch anything and why we love things. It's because the plight of the characters. We as audience members always see ourselves with a show like Game of Thrones. Every one of our characters, we're thinking of what we would do in that situation and what would happen to us. That's why it's so compelling, because we could all imagine ourselves in those situations that happen in Game of Thrones. Now, I'm not talking about flying around with dragons or using fire to blow up the Stannis Baratheon's fleet. I'm talking about scenes in rooms where somebody's double-crossed you. We all recognize that because to a certain extent, we've all had moments like that in our real lives. So I think that what is unsatisfying ultimately about Game of Thrones, and at least for me, the things that I've watched, my favorite scenes so far have been the scenes where you have our characters interacting with each other. That's all anybody wanted to see. Sure, it was great that you get a couple of great big battle sequences, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. For instance, in last night's episode, our characters were all lost, sort of. There was, it's what Weiss and Benioff keep talking about, D&D keep talking about these battles. And once again, in the after show for last night's episode, they were talking about how a battle becomes just noise if you're not following our major characters. And it's funny because that's something that was familiar to me because, as I've said before, I did a piece that I produced and edited that was on the Two Towers extended edition Blu-ray. That point is made by the editor. The editor says we had a very tasty battle. It was 45 minutes. And then we realized that it might have been a great battle, but it meant nothing because you weren't following our characters, and they had to re-edit the battle. So you were always following Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli throughout what was happening. And then, of course, what happens at the end when Gandalf shows up. So what we watched last night was spectacle, and I loved it from that point of view. I really enjoyed it. Was something that wasn't expected of me, but to watch one of the great scheming villainesses in all of media history. If you think about what she's been doing this final season, she's basically been standing at a parapet looking out a window. That's it. We've had no scenes with her that have been what we would expect of her. She has not, we didn't see her reaction to anything that's happened. We didn't even see a scene where she reacts to the news of what happened at Winterfell. There, not much. I mean, and it's strange to see this character who's been sidelined. And that is why I think people are so up in arms about Game of Thrones, because our characters that we're invested in, that we've gone on journeys with, and sometimes they've been up, like Nanny, sometimes she's been up, sometimes she's been down. But throughout the show, she's shown herself to be somebody who was the breaker of chains. And to the innocent lives, we've seen things that she's done as a result of even one child being killed. And I think what's happened with this final season of Game of Thrones is they're plotters. They're backing in these characters to. I really don't understand. They said, "Oh, we don't have enough moments to sustain 2 10-episode seasons." Well, watching these last 2 seasons, I beg to differ. Because, for instance, in last episode, we see Tyrion and Varys, who just suddenly, great big best friends, they're put on 2 sides of an ideological wall. Well, that was something that should have played out between them for 10 episodes or 8 episodes, and the decision either one of them makes is going to be dealt with in episode 9. That conflict between the 2 friends, that they're still friendly, but they have differing ideological points of view that are going to reach a crescendo, was something they would have drawn out, and you would have seen each one of these characters dealing with their point of view. And each time we saw them, we would have wondered, are they going to start thinking like the other one? How is that going to work? And what are they going to do? And Gilbert certainly wants to know. And we didn't see that. And to me, that's what Game of Thrones was all about. It was all about the character moments that would all sort of lead up to. I understand they had to have the Night's King, but really, after what we saw, did they? I don't know. But anyway, that's I've got more to say about this, but I wanted to read another letter along the same lines. Now, this letter comes from someone new who says they've been here for a while, but I haven't heard from them before, which I like. And it comes from Europe, and it comes from a Post-Geek Singularity member, Julie Lane. Hi, Rob. Longtime fan here. I rarely manage to tune in for live shows because of my time zone. I live in Europe, but I watch every show the day after, and they never fail to make my day a little bit better. So this is not the main topic I'd like to address in my letter, but first and foremost, I have to say the Hot Toys Nanotech gauntlet is badass. I wonder if they'll make an Iron Man figure with the gauntlet on. If they ever do, I might have to prepare my bank account. Now, about the actual reason why I'm writing to the Burnettwork. First of all, I need to say that I absolutely loved Endgame, and I didn't actually have a problem with what many people call plot holes or fan service moments. Two issues that to me are not even that prominent in the movie itself, since they take nothing away from the general enjoyment of it, but I digress. I mean, are there things that left me pondering and scratching my head after the movie ended? Yes, of course. I actually like that. I appreciate when the piece of media is complex and constructed in a way that requires thinking and a bit of analyzing. Because to me, it means that it's not just mindless entertainment, but it actually leaves a mark on the way all consume another entertainment piece in the future. So yes, I welcome open endings and endings that leave space for different possibilities and leave the consumer able to use their imagination. I don't need and I don't want every single detail explained on screen. So I have been a little iffy on this explanation tour that the directors and writers of Endgame have recently been on, where they're being questioned about every little decision and detail in the movie. Some people claim that these expectations are necessary since the plot is contradictory or convoluted. But I feel at a certain point you should be able to fill in these gaps yourself. And the movie does give all the necessary information you might need for this. Couldn't agree more. And let's not even talk about the fact that sometimes the creators don't even seem to have a definitive answer themselves, like with their different explanations on what happened when Cap stayed in the past with Peggy. I don't want to use harsh words, but I think that if you feel the need to have one absolute answer to every question that the film poses, then your imagination is failing you a little bit. A movie explaining every and any question the viewer may have is just not good storytelling, in my opinion. Which is basically why I wish the Russos and Eminem would stop doing this weird after-promotion press tour that is going on right now. And again, I'm not blaming anyone. Maybe it's a Disney decision that they have to do this, or maybe it's just a marketing decision to continue to promote the film to prevent the hype from dying down. While I think that a director's perspective may be exceptionally interesting sometimes, this is just too reminiscent of the J.K. Rowling situation, where she would reveal aspects of the main characters that weren't ever hinted at in the books or in the movies, and that left a bitter taste in some fans' mouths. It seems like fandoms are sometimes hungry for definitive answers that they'll reject anyway if they don't conform to what they wanted. What do you think of this? Do you think that creators should explain as much as possible, or do you think they should let the work speak for itself? This letter got way too long. I apologize for my nonsensical ramblings, and I hope I could explain myself clearly enough. English is not my first language. Thank you for providing a platform where we can discuss the things we're passionate about with other people equally as passionate as ourselves. And have a nice day, Julie. Well, first of all, Julie, what a wonderful letter to get from you. And I thought your English was just fine. I did enjoy that. But I think in the case of, I mean, with Endgame, you're right. I mean, the people are bumping on, everybody wants to know, and because we're fans, we're science fiction fans, we're fantasy fans, we're horror fans. We want to know about the machinations of whatever it is, why things work. And of course, with time travel, as we have been set up to expect, time travel is something that needs rules. Every time travel story that you've ever seen has rules behind it. And that's what we expect. That's the minimum that we expect from time travel stories. So I think at the end, the way they've set up the rules of the time travel in Endgame, when they have old Steve Rogers return to our present, how does that work? I mean, everybody wants to know how it works. I want to know how it works. So I understand that. But I go with it because, as you astutely pointed out, there's enough information there that you can make assumptions, and really you go with it. I mean, with a movie that we've talked about before has so many asks in it, I just go with the fact that, hey, it worked. It was very affecting for me. And to know that Steve Rogers, our Steve Rogers, led a life. I mean, it had the impact of a story like The Inner Light, if you're a Star Trek The Next Generation fan, where Captain Picard led a life that was decades long in the blink of an eye. And it was just as real to him as his own life. And I thought that was an amazing concept, and it works. But in the case of Game of Thrones, I really do. I think our friend Daniel really nailed why people are objecting to this. And I know for myself, I'm all about character and story. And first and foremost, I want to love the characters. I want to love the characters of every movie I watch, every book that I read, because that's who you're following. And you're either rooting for those characters, or in the case of Cersei Lannister, you wanted to see a comeuppance that other characters would be able to witness within the confines of the story. And I think that's what's really what you want, is those cathartic moments. Look, Return of the Jedi, which I have spoken about as being the greatest cinematic disappointment of my life, does have something that is incredible as far as the Star Wars saga is concerned, and that is the confrontation between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. Even if there wasn't one of the greatest space battles committed to film happening outside, which is fine, because nobody really cares at that point in Return of the Jedi. The spectacle, you're like, wow, it's great, it's a space battle. And Han and Leia are fighting with R2-3PO and Chewbacca on the ground, and that's fine. But the crux, what everybody's interested in at the end of Return of the Jedi, is what's happening in a room with three dudes. That's what it comes down to. The entire three movies comes down to the character of Luke Skywalker's journey and the temptation of going to the dark side. You've got the Emperor in between Luke and Vader. You've got Vader and Luke confronting one another, father and son. And you wonder, is Luke going to turn? I mean, there's nothing more epic than that. And it's three guys in a room. Sure, two of them are battling with lightsabers, and one of them is using his force powers, his powers of the Sith. But that's what the Star Wars movies all came. It's not about the space battles are great. The space battles or any of the big conflicts, the battle on Hoth, those are great. And those are part of what makes Star Wars great. But like everything else, the scenes that you really remember when people think about Star Wars, they're not thinking about the Battle of the Death Star. They're not thinking about what an awesome space battle that was. And wasn't it great when the Death Star blew up? No, you're thinking about the characters and what they said and their philosophies and their taglines. And that's what makes everything great. And Game of Thrones presented us with such a wide variety of characters that we loved, that you could have ended the 8th season of Game of Thrones with no battles. All of this stuff could have taken place in rooms where we saw these characters really going at it, like Tyrion and Varys having this conversation. I would love to have watched their differing points of view about what to do with Dany. And Dany, I mean, we don't see enough of Daenerys's change. Everyone's like, oh, she was not a mad Targaryen. The whole point about Daenerys is that she was not, it was Aegon, that's her father. She wasn't the Mad King. And it wasn't about her descent into madness. Not every Targaryen becomes mad. The whole point is that her journey was about breaking the wheel, breaking the life, the patterns that were going on in Westeros for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now, some could say that the destruction that we witnessed last night was the literal breaking of that wheel. But unfortunately, what was happening in season 8 with Dany becoming increasingly isolated, losing all of her allies, these are things that they would have spent an entire season building up to. You would have had 8 episodes watching her realizing that Jon Snow can't love her because of the revelations. He can't. And even though she loves him, and everything that we saw rushed would have been dealt with from the different points of view of many characters. And that's what Game of Thrones has always been about. And I think the reason, and for me too, I even enjoyed season 7, but I think that this season has been, for me, I haven't felt anything watching this other than, I will admit, I was very stressed out watching The Long Night. And I was was watching last night this apocalyptic battle, and it was unexpected for me, but I also was thinking, in a way, it was a metaphor for what they've decided to do with this last season. Now they might stick the landing, but what I have missed from Game of Thrones is all of my scheming characters and what they would say to each other and how their interaction would go. And we've what we have is very perfunctory, and none of it all was a rich tapestry, all of these characters' interactions going from place to place to place. And you'd watch the opening credits. They show the opening credits. They haven't even spent any time. Like, we don't know anything about how is Essos and the Iron Bank going to deal with the Golden Company now. We don't know anything about that. In one episode, it doesn't matter what they do. What we have lost, I think, with Game of Thrones is what we loved about it. They put the universe before the characters and their story. They violated the Burnett axiom. And somebody wrote earlier, a couple days ago, I read a letter, and I can't stop thinking, I don't remember who sent it in, but I can't stop thinking about the fact that they've given Game of Thrones an ending, but perhaps they should have just let it end. And I understand what they meant by that we don't need this big spectacle of an ending. What we needed was these characters, their resolutions to be resolved. I think back to some of my other favorite movies, All About Eve. All About Eve, to me, is about epic battles that are fought in terms of ambition and desire and the human heart, but it's all set in the New York theater district. It's all amongst actors and their and directors and producers, and there's no fight scenes, but the movie's epic. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. If you haven't seen All About Eve, it was Best Picture 1950, and it was incredible. And I think I watched Endgame, and what delighted me so much about Endgame was it was all about characters, and we got a spectacle, certainly at the end. But we had 2 hours of the characters and interacting. Like, a lot of fans didn't like Fat Thor, and they didn't like Professor Hulk. I loved all of that stuff because it was showing characters change. And that brings me to another letter. And another letter that I really liked. And I pulled it, and I can't find it now. I think I found it. Yes, and this is a letter that I wanted to get to today as well. And this has come from someone who sent me letters before, Noel Ryan, and it speaks to this subject. Noel says, "Hello, Rob. Hope you're keeping well." Yes, sir. I have a birthday in 2 days, one step closer to the grave, but I think I'm keeping all right. I recently listened to you and Mark on the Best Movie Never Made podcast discussing Free Enterprise 2. What a shame you may never get to make it, although I get the feeling that you still believe it may one day happen. Mark, on the other hand, perhaps not so optimistic. That's the feeling I got anyway. It's true, I've been carrying the torch for this movie for 20 years. Something that's been on my mind lately is the reaction by some fans to certain characters in Endgame, most notably Hulk and the depiction of that character. I know John Campea recently talked about how the character of Hulk was possibly shortchanged in Endgame, and that we never got to see the angry Hulk smash version of the character we know and love, aside from the first Avengers film, and somehow the preceding films have done a disservice to the character. I tend to disagree with this, as something that I think people tend to forget is that each of these characters have had a greater character arc than just one film. Each film is carefully growing the characters and continuing their story. And in the case of Hulk Banner, yes, we do only see the familiar angry version of the character really only in one film. However, in each film, we get to learn more about the inner struggle of Hulk Banner and of the character's dual personalities, both fighting for dominance and ultimately coming to a mutual coexistence in Endgame. The same can be seen in Thor as well, as pretty much all of the major characters. They all have an arc, and they're all different characters in Endgame than they were in their first appearances. The greatness of the MCU to me is its ability to develop these characters over all of the films. The development is thought out and not rushed. The actions and the growth of these characters is earned and not a forced character growth. Looking at you, DCEU. And so ultimately, very satisfying when these character arcs finally come to a head. We followed the characters on their life journeys, and they are different now because of their experiences in each film. In my opinion, the people who complain about the Hulk or other characters such as Thor not exactly being who they were previously are kind of missing the point. How boring it would have been if after 20-something films our characters were exactly how they were in their first appearances. I doubt Marvel would be the success if it was today. I doubt Marvel would be the success if it was today if they just gave us the same versions of the characters because it was popular. In talking about the success of character development in the MCU makes me want to talk about the lack of it in the DCEU. However, I think I will save that for another letter. Thanks for reading and feel free to share as always. Noel Ryan. Well, I think Noel hits it on the head there. He absolutely is talking about what I've been thinking about. And again, I loved seeing Professor Hulk. I loved seeing when Banner says, I've been treating the Hulk like a disease, but it turns out he was the cure. I thought that was phenomenal. It harks back to the comics, and I really enjoyed it. Now, this idea of Hulk smash, that's fine. But again, that becomes more spectacle, and I'm much more interested in characters. If I think back to some of my favorite films of all time, All That Jazz is a character study about the director, Bob Fosse, really. He has a character named Joe Gideon that stands in as his life proxy, and it's all about one man coming to grips with what does it mean to love and create art in the modern world, working in both theater and movies. And it's one of the most influential films I've ever seen in my life, both in terms of the craft and technique behind it and the position and the acting that Roy Scheider takes in the film and the position the director takes about his own life. It's an amazing movie. And all of my favorite films tend to be about characters. And when I see genre characters, I mean, look at Star Wars. Star Wars is about Luke's becoming a Jedi, the 3 movies, and they do a pretty good job of that. You know, Empire does a great job of he goes out on one path and then rejects that path, and look what happens to him. And I think that all of our favorite things, I mean, the character of Kirk, sure, Kirk didn't much change in the original series, but he certainly did over the course of the films. And that was one of the things I most loved about Star Trek the Motion Picture is we saw our 3 principal characters, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They were all in places that weren't good. You know, McCoy, even though he's studying for Brini medicine and thought he didn't want to be brought back into Starfleet, and Spock had just failed achieving Kolinar, and Kirk was no longer captain of a ship. It was amazing to see that when that movie came out. And why it meant so much to me when I was 12 years old is because I was moving into junior high. I just started junior high school. I was moving into adolescence. What did the future hold? I didn't know. And childhood, I've been able to watch Star Trek my entire life almost, and they never changed. The characters are always the same. And I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture on the cusp of, I was becoming a teenager. And there were my favorite characters in a place that I'd never seen them before and never recognized them like this. And watching them come together was a great joy for me. And that's one of the reasons I love Star Trek the Motion Picture so much. They continued to deal with that in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And there were elements of it as the Star Trek films moved on, because our main characters, what was so interesting about what happened with the Star Trek movie series is that never in history did they allow a failed television show to become a gigantic movie property and then have the characters, what was happening to them physically, how they were moving through their lives, was incorporated into the plot of the film. And I really felt that was an amazing way to go. They weren't just giving us a series of adventures and not acknowledging that our characters were in middle age now. And they did. And that I thought was a bold, brave choice, especially when you're talking about action, adventure, science fiction characters. So I've always been about the characters. And I think while the spectacle Game of Thrones has certainly delivered, although I would say that the battle episodes we've seen directed by, is it Miguel Sapochnik, have been the sloppiest and loosey-goosey of all of the Game of Thrones battle scenes, which has surprised me because they had the longest time to edit them and put them all together. But I understand. But I think the failing that I have with Game of Thrones this season is that the characters have not been well served. And the show was always first and foremost about the characters. It was about the Game of Thrones that they were playing. And I feel that's been jettisoned to get to the end. And I think that's been sad for me. Although I've enjoyed the show. I really enjoyed the first 2 episodes because it was all character, character, character. And that's what I wanted. So it comes down to now, do our creators, does Ryan Johnson, does D&D, does Weiss and Benioff, do the Russo brothers and Marcus and McFeely, do they owe us? Any of our creators owe us for something that we might not like how it wound up? I mean, I know as a lifelong comic book reader, there's been times I've wanted to put my face through a comic creator's face or put my fist through their face because I hated what happened with the character arc. I hated what they did with certain characters and where they took them. And I would get angry. I would get mad. I would literally get mad at these creators and be like, I am mad. I am mad at J.J. Abrams. I'm mad for taking something that I considered to be something that was meaningful in my life and something that I learned from and something that inspired me for years at a time. And he dumbed it down. He turned it into something, as he said, I'm not even a Star Trek fan. I was never a Star Trek fan growing up. And yet I get to direct 2 of the most expensive Star Trek movies ever made. I get to reinvent Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and make these characters that literally were a part of my life for half a century. And I get to change them and basically make them dumber than they were to give them mass appeal. I'm still angry about that. And I feel he did kind of the same thing to Star Wars, to be honest. But it really makes me angry. Now, is that anger misplaced? I mean, what is it? Are we as fans owed anything as fans? Or do our creators owe anything to us? And I think, unfortunately, the answer to that is no, they don't. The creators don't owe anything to me personally, and they don't owe anything to you personally. But where I do think creators owe something is to the very franchises or the very media that they're working so diligently to create. Because by definition, if you're creating media for the consumption of the audience, what you want to do is ultimately, I think, at least my own philosophy of life would say, that you want to elevate your audience. It's the campground philosophy that I don't know if anyone reads Dan Savage. He's a sex columnist. He writes a column called Savage Love. And his rule in any kind of relationships or whatever wacky shenanigans you're going to get up to with consenting adults, the rule is that you practice the campground philosophy. You leave the campground in a better state than which you found it. So if there's some litter around, you put it in the garbage can. If it's in the, you pack up your trash and put it away after you've camped. Just like he says, if you're in a relationship and you want to do some weird stuff or whatever it is, you try and leave your partner better off than when they first got involved in a relationship with you. That's how you should lead your life. And I believe that that's what creators should endeavor to do, making all of this media. That's what I think. I don't think they owe us, the audience, but they do owe the properties that they're working on. And I don't think that Game of Thrones, the legacy of Game of Thrones, has been well served by the approach of the last 2 seasons, because it was a show about the characters, and it now isn't a show about the characters. The characters are no longer at the forefront, like Daniel said at the beginning. It's all in the service of plot and ending the show. Well, you could have ended this show. You could have ended this show if the Night King walked into a room and confronted Bran and Jon Snow. You could have made that interesting. You didn't have to see a battle. You didn't have to see what happened to King's Landing happen to King's Landing. You could have dealt with it all in the rooms and things and led up to one. I mean, you could have, I don't know, intercut the battle of 2 battles. Who knows? Or done it like the end of Godfather. Who knows? Now, it's interesting. There's a lot of people that like Game of Thrones, but I think it really depends that have liked season 8. It really depends how you come at it. I really think it depends how you come at things. And it seems to be a shame that ultimately a show like Game of Thrones, and by the way, I feel this way about other shows like The X-Files, which I thought also had a really shitty ending, because, well, that's a whole other other story. But I do think that, to answer my own question, I always leave these questions open-ended, that I think creators have an obligation to do right by the properties that they're working on. And when you decide that you're going to end a show in 13 episodes, that suddenly becomes more important than the story that you've already been telling. It's how can we make it work? And I still don't understand why it had to be done in 13. I mean, we had an extra year to do these episodes. So was it a money issue? I don't know. I personally would have liked to have seen a lot more of those character moments rather than the spectacle that we're getting. All of this. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine if we had an extra 7 episodes? I mean, we got 13, but if we had those extra 7, what could have been done? And I don't understand. They followed for 6 seasons. It was 10 episodes. The 9th episode, everybody knew the shit would hit the fan. And then you'd have a great 10th episode where more shit would hit the fan, but it just wasn't as expensive. I mean, that was part of the fun of the show too. And why did they dispense with that? I mean, I would have liked 7 more episodes of people just talking to each other. But anyway, what do you guys think? Let's see. What do people have to say today? I don't know. I can't wait to see. Let's see what you got. What do you got for me today? By the way, the letters that I keep getting, fantastic. Remember, if you want to send me letters, send them to the Burnettwork.net. Also, a kid in high school sent me a link to a documentary about his grandmother. I would like to put that up in the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery. So if you're watching this, write me and tell me that that's okay, because I would like to hear what you have to say. David Cabrera says, "Hi, RMB. We'll watch later. Don't want any Game of Thrones spoilers." Well, okay. I tried to be a little pretty spoiler free, kind of. Darth Suthia says, "Hey, Mr. B, when I was younger, I was about the rage life when it came to disliking film and television, getting upset over things I couldn't control. Nowadays, I say, whatever, and move on. Just thankful to have content to watch. Besides, I can't get too upset or else my blood pressure will raise and I'll have another stroke. I can't let that happen." No, Darth Suthius, we do not want you to have another stroke. But, here's the thing. I think it's very interesting. And I've often wondered, like 2,000 years ago when people were reading plays or Euripides or somebody like the Greek myths, Aristotelian, whatever, when did people get as involved as we do now? I mean, I think what's really interesting, I know that when I'll freely admit this to you, as a lifelong fan, as a kid who was reading books and puzzling over all of these things, I've said this before, I spent an inordinate amount of time, and now I still do, puzzling over these kinds of things, puzzling over fictional characters and their comings and goings, and the relative size of starships, and why are there windows in the front of the JJ Prize. I mean, these things and there have been many times where, like, going through life, you're in a relationship with somebody and somebody will say to you, "What are you thinking right now?" And I'm like, really, I was thinking about the fact that on the Franz Joseph technical manual, or the Franz Joseph Enterprise designs, it shows that the Enterprise has a bowling alley. And I just don't think that would be true in the 23rd century. There's been many times when that's going through my mind, and you can't even say that. And people call you aloof. They think you're a hard man to know. But it's been true. I have run into that a lot. And I think we as fans, when we love these things, it's almost as if we live in Westeros ourselves, or I live in the Star Trek universe. And somewhere in my mind, I honestly believe that. And that's why people cosplay. And that's why there's Renaissance fairs, is because, and the San Diego Comic-Con, is because we want to believe, these fictional worlds are so interesting. And they're so sort of removed from our daily lives, and they're just we want to live there. We, in a way, we've tricked ourselves, sort of. I mean, we all know what the real world's like, but there's a part of us that wants to believe that maybe we'll rub a magic lamp and we'll be asked to go live in wherever, and we can. I think that's part of it. That's why, MMORPG games or whatever, massive multiplayer online RPGs, role-playing games, are so popular, because that's kind of like living in an alternate universe, an alternate reality. And I can only imagine that when true VR comes of age, there's going to be a lot of people that, hey, if you could be put in a chamber and go into a virtual world for like a month and live it out in real time, I think people would do that. I know I would, because why not? But Darth Suthius, don't have a stroke. I think we're stronger with you than without you. That's what Captain Kirk said to Matt Decker in the Doomsday Machine. Aaron H says the Danny turn was insulting to my intelligence. So rushed and out of character and just seemed like pure fan service. They chose the plot before the characters. Well, Aaron H, I think you're right. And what's funny is I don't think that's, first of all, the idea of fan service, you know what fan service is? Make your movie or your TV show good. That's it. I mean, just because you give us something that we want to see, in the case of Endgame, they've teased Captain America wielding Mjolnir since Age of Ultron. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that at all. I really don't. I think there's nothing wrong. Gilbert, do you think there's something wrong with that? What's up, buddy? Shh, come on. What's up, buddy? But yeah, I think that's what. Hey, you want to cook, Gilbert? But I think that's what fan service is. Fan service is when people want great stories. That's what they want. That's all they want. That's what they're interested in. You can come by. That was Zoe Trope, everybody. She's full of story tropes. But yes, that's what fan service is. Make it good. That's what we all want. And just because you give somebody like Mjolnir in a movie, that's not fan service. That was set up. That was teased. That's something everybody wants to see. That just makes the movie cool. Alexander Wilson says, John Campea co-signed with me today that Danny was always a tyrant and crazy since season 1. I told you it was all there. Everything she did in the episode was foreshadowing before in earlier episodes. See, I disagree with that. I think everything was foreshadowing that Danny was going to do the opposite. Why is it that just because her father was the Mad King, she was trying to do everything to not be part of her father's legacy, to not be part of that? She was going to be different. And if you look through the entire show, there's been many times where she has been the breaker of chains, where she has liberated people. Sure, she's killed people brutally, but I don't think that to have her go down the mad tyrant route is easy. That's not even, to me, that's not even great storytelling. And I think that there's a lot of this is Alexander Wilson, by the way. I don't know if I said your name, Alexander. And I think, well, that's obvious. If that was the way to go, okay. But what she did, there's nothing in Game of Thrones that would ever foreshadow what she actually did. She's not the killer of innocent women and children. That's not what, I mean, even her father didn't end up blowing up the city. And why is she angry? Again, why? I mean, she has her troops. The Night King was defeated. She could have taken the throne. I mean, it made her, what I didn't like is it made her very weak. The idea that she was, oh, I'm isolated. If we got into that more and saw the psychology behind it, maybe. But I don't think that I don't think it was foreshadowed because that's the way it's the obvious way. And what they were doing was trying to fight against that. And now to me, it turned it into something that was less. It's not as smart. It's not as smart. At least that's the way I see it. Sky Amazing Guy says, Robillion Man, your enthusiasm about Godzilla has me super excited for the film. Also, John Wick 3 this week. Can't wait to see John Wick 3. I already bought my tickets weeks ago. I'm very excited to see John Wick 3. Godzilla is so much fun. Again, it is a kaiju movie, a true kaiju movie in the every step, every spirit of the kaiju movie. I love it. It's great. Willow Yang says, what are the plans for your birthday? Will you be doing a live chat so we can all celebrate with you together? Indeed, I will. Indeed, I will be doing a live chat. I don't have any plans for my birthday. You know, I used to have these big, elaborate birthday parties. I mean, when I was married one year, my wife threw me an eyes wide shut birthday party with not the fucking, but everybody was dressed up and wearing masks. And I didn't know about it. It was a surprise eyes wide shut party. And I got led out to my friend Sean Fanning. He had a pool and everybody was around the pool and they're all going, oh, and it was weird. It was a good party though. But yes, I don't have any plans for my birthday this year. I really don't, because, you know, it gets to the point where I don't know. I like to celebrate other people's birthdays though. But it's I don't getting old's fine. I like getting old. I'm actually a fan of the aging process because it's part of life. It's interesting. I find my differing perspectives and watching what happens in other people's lives, and it's strangely reassuring. It's all part of the human experience, the human drama, the human animal. It fascinates me. So does it suck that I'm not 23 and that I weigh 50 pounds less and that I wasn't as pretty as I used to be? Probably. But then what are you going to do? Go hang out in bars today where everybody you can't even chat a girl up because she's looking into her phone? Do I want to live in that world? I don't know. I like to be here talking with you guys. Aaron H says they really killed Cersei with a rock. She deserves a beheading in front of Sansa and Arya, but no way they gave her a sympathetic romantic death. Ridiculous. Well, that was, by the way, a spoiler alert, of course, but I thought what they did with Cersei this season was pretty much unforgivable. Pretty unforgivable. They didn't do anything with her at all. I mean, like, she literally didn't do anything. Everything that was being done had already been set up in previous seasons. She did nothing. And that why not? It's just, I didn't understand. Here's one of the great villainesses ever. Lena Headey is such a great actress, and they gave her nothing to do. And at the end, she was just a simpering little. It was, not good. And the thing is, like Alexander Wilson, who points out that Dany's transformation had been set up since the beginning, and I beg to differ. I think that what they were going to do is go against that, and that was always the tension. Would she ever become a mad Targaryen like her father? Like, my whole thing was, why would she? The madness. Aegon believed he would turn into a dragon when if the city burned. That he was deluded. He was nuts. Dany was not nuts. Dany was taken by the Dothraki, and she learned. She learned from her mistakes, and she learned from her successes. She learned how to do what she was going to do. And the idea when she got to King's Landing, she's like, oh, that this is not going to be, or when she got to Westeros, that, oh, this is tough and it's not like how I thought, and she became a pouty little girl, made no sense to me. I felt that character turn was uncharacteristic of her. It was just another obstacle she was going to have to learn and maneuver and overcome. What I liked about her was I thought she had wisdom beyond her years, and watching her come to grips with that wisdom, I thought was really, really interesting. So Stubble McShave is here. Stubble McShave says, I love the first 4 and 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, but this season they have killed my excitement for rewatching it, knowing that the characters are so mistreated in the end. I agree with you. It's funny. I actually canceled my order for the full series on disc because I don't need this season. I don't. If I rewatch Game of Thrones again, I might just watch the first 3 or 4 seasons because they're so good, and it's such a lesson in how to make great television. This last season has nothing for me to learn from. There's nothing to go back and watch really and enjoy. At least that's the way I feel about it. Darth Suthia says, so do you think there's going to be an adult film parody of Steve and Sharon now? Hey, anything's possible. Well, there's already X-rated versions of the Avengers, and they're pretty interesting. Not that I've watched them, but they're out there. You can see them. You should check them out if you like those things. Brandon Valenzuela says Gilbert says to let him do his thing. It's just when people come and go, and he barks at them, and people come and go during the girls come back from school, and he just wonders what's up. He doesn't know. Darth Suthia says, do you think introducing Gigan into the Godzillaverse would be unrealistic? Or if they do you think they'll adapt him to be more organic? That's interesting, Darth Suthius. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think they would have to. I mean, look, as much as I do love my Mecha Godzilla, I do love Gigan, I do love Jet Jaguar. I don't know if there's any place for them in this universe. They could introduce Jaegers, and maybe they could have a biomechanized Gigan. I mean, I could believe that could happen if they needed to make something like that. I mean, this Godzilla King of the Monsters really skirts. They've gone out of their way to make the 2014 Godzilla and Kong Skull Island pretty believable, pretty grounded. This movie pushes that. this movie really goes over into true kaiju territory. I mean, there's even that flying machine, the giant flying wing that you see is definitely their version, and Mike Doherty confirmed it to me, of the Super X. And there's all kinds of, I mean, we didn't get maser cannons, which I was looking forward to seeing. They didn't go that far, but there's so much in the movie that is really great. But it's a full blown kaiju movie with a little bit of kaiju logic, and that's why I loved it. Alexander Wilson says, in your words, they teased Cap wielding Mjolnir, which you liked, but rebuked people who said they teased Danny being a crazy tyrant. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that Danny's story that was being told throughout the course of Game of Thrones shouldn't have been one where she became a crazy tyrant. I mean, that was the obvious thing to do. That is the most obvious storytelling trope to follow. And what Game of Thrones always did throughout its run was subvert your expectation for everybody. You know, things happen that you never expected. So the idea that she did what she did and went full on crazy was something that I found. It was unexpected to see how far they took it, but to me it was incredibly disappointing to see that happen, because that was what I expected to happen. And I don't think that Cap wielding Mjolnir, since it's been done in the comics, is something that isn't expected. They set it up and they pay it off. And it's different in the sense that that's something I think that we really want to see. Whereas I don't think anybody wanted to see her. It became a cliche Targaryen. I don't think anyone wanted to see all of our characters turn into people that they weren't. Tyrion being the way he is, everybody was out of character. And I think it's a different thing. I think that it also, one of the reasons I like Professor Hulk, it wasn't expected. I mean, the idea that somebody's going to Hulk out, that's easy. Yeah, he's going to Hulk out because he's the Hulk. But it's a lot harder to do something that's unexpected and make that work. And from a storytelling standpoint, I think it's much more satisfying when that were to happen. I mean, what really should have happened, I think, is once you see that Tyrion and Varys were on opposite sides, what would they do, and how would that affect what was going to happen with her? You had these two guys that had now drawn a line in the sand. One guy, Tyrion, believed in her, saw reasons to believe in her, and Varys wants to believe in Jon Snow. And by definition, what they wanted would have then, in Game of Thrones fashion, play out, I think, in the rest of the series. That would have affected, their actions would have affected what was going on between everybody, and sort of led to this confrontation between our characters. See, what Danny did last night, none of our characters were really involved in it. It just became a spectacle, and suddenly we're watching this apocalyptic event happen. And was that what we wanted to see? An apocalyptic event is sort of outside the purview of our characters. And I understand, okay, well, that's what was supposed to me, I'm like, that wasn't interesting. I don't think it was good storytelling. I really don't. Let's see. Raven says, missed you on the John Campea show today. It's not as good without you. I apologize for that. I don't miss the John Campea show lightly. I will be back. I've just been inundated with all kinds of things and work and personal matters. And the last 2 weeks have just filled up. Suddenly I've got 10 different things I'm trying to get finished. Anthony Gonzalez says, Danny chained up her dragons for killing one child. Yes, she did. And, the foreshadowing of her going crazy, but the fact that she did these things, we've watched her deal with all of the political machinations of other cities as she's made her way to King's Landing. And King's Landing should have been the ultimate example of power plays. And what I was really disappointed about is there was no court intrigue. I wanted to see court intrigue now that Danny was in Westeros. How was the rest of Westeros dealing with her arrival? We didn't see anybody. We didn't see anybody from Essos. We didn't see anybody. What does the Iron Bank think? What's going on in Dorne? What is the rest of, maybe we'll find out next episode, but the last two seasons should have been a culmination of everything, all of these various threads. And that's what I really missed. I really missed that. I missed the character interplay. I did. I missed the character interplay, and they could have had these last 3 episodes or whatever. But if we had received 10 episodes instead of just 7 and then 6, I think the show could have stuck the landing. And I really just don't think that if you go back, especially if you go back and you watch the first 3 seasons, especially, the way this season has gone is not well done. Roberto Suarez says, we established last episode that the armies were on par with each other. This week, King's Landing barely put up a fight and the Scorpions were useless. I'm right there with you. I mean, we saw one Scorpion lance fired. You would think that, knowing that she has a dragon, why weren't the ships in a circle where they could all be firing? I mean, it was such a strange... Again, you look at this stuff and you're wondering what's going on. King's Landing did barely put up a fight. Where the Golden Company? Where's Yara? Where's Yara Greyjoy? I mean, where'd she go this season? There's all kinds of, like, why was Euron's fleet unimpeded? It was strange. It was strange that all of these things that they spent so much time building up. You understood the tactics. You understood the battle about Blackwater. None of that came into play at all. None of the fact that Cersei had the green flames. What was it called? Dragonfire, whatever it's called. I forget. Through the city, she could have been the one detonating it and blowing up parts of the city as a last ditch effort. I mean, that would have made more sense, where you saw her callous disregard for life. But, that's just me. Darth Suthius says, okay, we're all curious now. Just what other kind of themed parties did you have? You crazy, crazy man. I've been to some themed parties. I haven't thrown many themed parties in my life. I've gone to some great Halloween parties, but I haven't done a lot of theme parties. Not like an Eyes Wide Shut party. I haven't had any swingers parties, if that's what you're asking. Zach Losel says, Shalom, Rob. I'm truly disappointed with where Danny went. I really thought they wouldn't do the easy and predictable thing, yet here we are. Yeah, exactly. It's easy and predictable. Like, she goes crazy. Like, this is not something that this is exactly what you would think the whole time. When's she going to go nuts? I mean, that's what I object to. Rakan Man 85 says, Game of Thrones ended 2 seasons ago, changed my mind. Well, look, I liked last season. I thought I had some logic problems, but for the most part, I liked last season a lot. This season, I don't know. We'll see where it goes. I mean, maybe if our Twitter writer is right, next week will be a great episode. But unfortunately, I will never think that Jaime Lannister and Cersei Lannister had resolutions to their stories. Why am I watching their story? The real question is, we as viewers, when you read a story, when you finish a story that's satisfying, you feel that you've been taken on a journey, you've learned something through these characters. What is the end of Jaime and Cersei's story? That they're bad people? Well, we knew they were bad people. We were watching a redemption arc for Jaime. And that redemption arc never had a satisfying conclusion. He's like, nah, we never had a confrontation between the two of them that showed that they changed. It's just, And I think that from a storytelling standpoint, that it remains unsatisfying. You're watching this going, well, what was the point of me watching this journey that this man was on? He was a horrible, despicable person who had a crisis of conscience and sort of learned that the world was different than he thought it was. Even though he killed a king, he killed Aegon Targaryen. I think it's Aegon, because he was going to kill his own population. He saved King's Landing. And there was never anything in what was happening ironic that his daughter was destroying King's Landing, and he never had, all he got was to Cersei. He had no ending. His character had no ending. And I just don't understand that. Alexander Wilson says, we're going to have to agree to disagree on Danny going crazy. It was foreshadowed to me. She have even said that she would burn down cities pardon me. She even said that she would burn down cities before, and she just did it. Arya was a part of the battle. Yes, but that's the thing. that was exactly, it wasn't what Game of Thrones was famous for doing, which was always subverting expectations. And maybe the expectation was she would change. Maybe I had this expectations that it wouldn't be so easy. But the problem was, I don't think that was good storytelling. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And apparently I'm not the only one. Aaron H said, she also said she won't be the queen of ashes. Yeah, she said that too. I mean, that's the whole thing. There's a lot of videos online, and I want to mention, I think the website is Ideas. Pardon me, the YouTube channel is Ideas of Ice and Fire. And the guy, I've loved his videos. I watch his videos for a very long time, and he's done great videos about Dune and this, and I think it's called Ideas of Ice and Fire on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel. Man, he was very upset by last night's episode, but he did a very cogent analysis of it, and I'm yeah. Brandon Valenzuela says, off topic, but I'm making a trip to LA in a few days. Any burger or pizza places you love that you can recommend? Well, if you can get in, go to Moza. Moza Pizza is really, really good. It's a little pricey, but it's on the corner of, I want to say it's on the corner of Highland and Melrose, I think. Moza. I think it's like Mozza. That's a great place. But burger places, oh my God, there's all of the great burger places. That's tough to say. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's so many places I get burgers in LA, but I don't have any place off the top of my head. Right. Nothing is jumping out at me, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of burger places here. But yeah, I can't think of any. What does anybody else have to say here? Let's see. Learning Disabled Spock says Euron in the books is a great character. In the show, he's Captain Bro Sparrow. I agree. I think Euron was never a very well developed character. I like the actor portraying him. I thought he was given nothing to play. Bartomac says Danny learned from the previous engagement. Attack from above. Scorpions couldn't fire directly up. She burnt the ships before the Scorpions could maneuver. My thoughts. Yeah, I'll agree with that. How much fire does a dragon carry? Apparently an unlimited amount, because you need some kind of combustible material, and there was certainly a lot of combustible material in that dragon's belly. That was another thing. Talk about suspension of disbelief. I had a hard time believing that dragon was able to come up with that much flammable liquid in its guts. Dante's, what is that? Dante's says, yes, Danny was once a sweet, innocent girl. Now she is a mad queen. Yeah. But it's funny because her father was literally insane. Like, he believed insane things. I don't think that she was mad. She was just mad crazy. She was angry and she was isolated, but I just don't believe even her father didn't do what he was going to do, and she did, and she didn't believe that she was going to burn up and become a dragon herself. Akeem Forbes says Cersei should have been huddling up to the throne till the bitter end, not just standing out a window and then get taken out by a rock. I'm with you. Where was the Iron Throne? Is it still there? We don't know. Bartomac says, I expected her to burn the city. Hope she wouldn't, but believe she would. Sunday shouted it last episode. Yeah, she did. But again, there was a lot of innocent people there. Like, what was the point? Brad Brickley says, Captain Brad says, I just hope George R.R. Martin can finish up the book series to see the rich story we could have finished with. D&D should have handed off the show if they didn't want to finish strong. Well, it's funny because no one, I think they do think they finished strong. They provided what they thought was going to be a grand spectacle. What I find interesting is I don't understand how they came to that. I don't understand, like, finishing these episodes are like, yep, this is what we need. So yeah, I I don't disagree. It was a bummer. Rakan Man 85 says next episode Danny ties Sansa to a railroad track. Laugh out loud. Well, that was something else. I mean, it was really interesting. What I found interesting is the fact that one of the interesting things about Game of Thrones is there's so much back and forth where you're always seeing different points of view, different characters' points of view, and we sort of lost that this season as well. And I really enjoyed that about the show, the jumping around, and you realize that certain things are happening in one place that's going to affect a character that doesn't see it or doesn't know that it's coming. And that was one of the joys, I think, of the show. Alexander Wilson asks, what's your opinion on Nichelle Nichols wanting to quit Trek and she didn't see any value of the role until Dr. King talked her into staying? What Alexander Wilson is talking about is Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura, wanted to leave the show, but Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, I don't know if he talked her into it, but he explained why it was important that she was there. And I think that it's Denise Crosby as Tasha Yar realized after the first few episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, as an actress, she wasn't given much to do. She thought that her role would be more pivotal, that she would have more to play, as all actors want to do. Well, they don't know. Like they didn't know. None of the actors believed, if you watch my documentaries on the Blu-ray, that the show would run more than one season. Certainly Patrick Stewart didn't believe Next Generation would run more than one season because they didn't see how you could recreate a legendary show like Star Trek. Well, at the time, Star Trek was not legendary. Nobody knew what its importance was what its importance would be in television history. And I think Nichelle Nichols was thinking as an actress, she's like, well, look, this role isn't exactly the meaty role that I think I'm going to be typecast. I'm going to be sitting on this communications thing with a thing in my ear for the rest of my life. And I want more. She was not thinking about the larger ramifications about what did it mean to have a black woman on the bridge of the Enterprise in 1966. The civil rights movement is still ongoing. And Martin Luther King was still a force that was stirring up a lot of change, and he was threatened. He was threatening to the powers that be, and when he said that to her, she didn't know, but she stuck with it because he convinced her. He showed her. He probably pointed out that, look, you're a symbol whether you know it or not. And for her, she was just an actress doing a role. Having worked with lots of actors, all actors want to have better roles than they have for the most part, unless they're the star of the show. So I think it was probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to Star Trek was that Martin Luther King convinced Nichelle Nichols that her part mattered, and that people were looking at the fact that there was a black woman on the bridge of the Enterprise who was command level, who was interacting with the people on the highest levels of that ship. And she mattered. She was at a prime bridge position, and she was important. And I think that again, that's representation that I don't think is understood by most people. Now everybody's screaming to have. There's more representation for people than there's ever been before. Does that mean there shouldn't be more? No, of course it means there should be more. But there's more now than ever, and yet people are bitching and moaning and complaining about it. And identity politics is everywhere. But think about what was going on in 1966. What it was like to put Nichelle Nichols on the bridge of the Enterprise. I'm sure they got pushback. I mean, as a matter of fact, I know they did. And for Gene Roddenberry to do that, it was important. But if you're an actress, you're not. Nichelle Nichols does not get up every morning when she was trying to get jobs in Hollywood in the 60s thinking, well, I'm black. Her first thought was probably that I'm an actress. I hope I get the part. I'm going to go out and give it my all. I want to get the part. And when she got the part didn't turn out to be as great as she'd hoped. So she's like, well, I'll go get another part on another show. Maybe I'll get on another show that has something more for me to do than just sit in this chair and answer the phone. But she needed someone to tell her that what you're doing matters. And I think it's probably one of the most important things actually that ever happened to Star Trek, because her presence was felt. It rippled throughout. Well, for the last 50 years, her character has rippled throughout time. So I think it was really important. Aaron H says, do you think John kills Danny now? I don't know. I think I think an angry mob will string her up and hang her. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they're going to end it with her sitting on the Iron Throne, surrounded. Where did the Dothraki come from? The next season you see the Dothraki. Is that a new tribe that comes and shows up that wasn't with her? I don't know. I don't know who's going to kill Danny. I don't know. Jason Soto says, no matter how Game of Thrones ends, it will be divisive. Where do you get your T-shirts, Rob? Oh, well, like the late great John Schnepp before me, we love our geeky shirts. This shirt, this Bring Me Thanos Flirkin shirt, I thought this was a little goofy, even for me, a little obvious. This is a little. I usually like to go a little bit more subtle, but I just thought this was funny, and I like cats. So this is just one of those pop-up ads on Facebook that for 3 days, get this shirt. But my favorite T-shirt place, the geekiest T-shirt place ever, is Last Exit to Nowhere. And basically all of their shirts, well, not all of them, but their shirts all have, for the most part, the logos for fictional places in movies and television, company logos. And the reason I discovered them was in Geek Magazine, I want to say like more than 10 years ago, Simon Pegg was wearing a WGON T-shirt, and WGON, and it was the logo of the radio station, the TV station that Fran and Steven worked for in the original Dawn of the Dead, the Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And I was like, oh my God, I have to have the T-shirt. So I went, it was a little hard to find, but I found out that it was Last Exit to Nowhere and bought that shirt. And they've got the best T-shirts ever. They're deep cuts, but they're great. But then I'm always looking for cool, geeky shirts. And sometimes I buy those stupid Facebook, something will show up and like they had a Fantastic Planet. And once you buy one shirt, then you get a bunch of other ads and it adds up. Aaron H says, Danny ordered more Dothraki on Amazon Prime. Probably. I don't know. We'll see. Alexander Wilson says, George R. R. Martin says, the major points of the ending will be things that I told them, 5 or 6 years ago. It could be. That could be. I hope so. I mean, maybe. I just don't think George R. R. Martin, judging from not just the Game of Thrones books, but a lot of other books I've read by him, would make Dany descend to be the Mad Queen again, because that's the obvious thing to do. And Game of Thrones has never done that. And I think, as a matter of fact, I don't even think that Dany is now that she's not mad. She's not crazy. She knew what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing. So, yeah. The King of Scotland says, Dany has never been a good person. Every good thing she's done is because she loves to be loved. She's an emotionally, she's an emotionally broken narcissist with a God complex who enjoys killing her enemies. Well, that's true too. What's interesting is that makes her different than her father. And that's interesting. See, I would like to have seen, and that's something that they were setting up, and that's what Varys and Tyrion were discussing. Varys knew, and I would have liked to have seen that play out. And maybe Jon, the conflict would be, would Jon be able to pull her back from the brink? That would have been interesting to see that give and take as they moved through Westeros. Who knows? Yeah, Roberto Suarez says, Dany gave the Tallies a chance to bend the knee first. What she did in King's Landing is equivalent to the Tarleys bending the knee and then killing them anyway. No, it's not, because she killed innocent children and innocent women. And she still has to have subjects to rule, as Tyrion pointed out to her. So it was bad. I thought it was bad what she did. Adam Gross says, I felt she decided if she was not going to have it, then no one's going to take her family home away again. Yeah, that could be true. That could be. Robert April says, let's just say that Dany had a bit of a psychotic break. That could be too. I mean, again, I don't feel it was in Game of Thrones. Wasn't in keeping with the style of the story that they were telling, because when these lead ups to these experiences, it was always your past catching up to you. And even the Red Wedding was, you knew when Robb Stark rejected Walter Frey's marriage proposal, he accepted it and then reneged on that deal, that was bad. You knew that something was going to go down, and he did. I mean, Rob Stark cut his own throat there, and there was going to be hell to pay. We just didn't know when or how. And when the Red Wedding happened, it was really, really shocking because we didn't know what was going to happen. Oscar Elias, we just knew it was going to. Like he had basically, Rob Stark had lit, like so many characters had lit a fuse that was going to blow up. It was going to get to a bomb and explode at some point, but we just didn't know when or how. And you get lulled into a false sense of security, and then boom, they got you. Oscar Elias says, do you think John's actions will reflect on Ned Stark's and honor leads to death? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what John's going to do. I think that John is go back to Winterfell. I really don't know. I don't know what any of those characters are going to do. I mean, I just, what's she going to do? Burn it. She's burnt. She's killed how many? She killed 1 million people, maybe. I mean, what's left? We'll see. Jeffrey Berry says the Doctor Strange Hot Toys figure is the best figure, is epic, best figure I own. It is a good figure. I have it right in there. It's a great figure. The King of Scotland says, in fact, everyone with a legit shot for the throne, with the exception of John, is a bad person. All of them murder. All of them enjoy the suffering of their enemies, all but John, who is an honorable man. That is true. That is true. But, you know, I could see them having Daenerys being queen of King's Landing, and you've got the Dothraki, and you know, again, we saw that our side, once this apocalyptic battle was happening, and then all of a sudden they're turning to our side, was turning to rape and pillaging. And what are the Dothraki going to do in Westeros now? I don't know. Adam Gross says, too grand and epic a tale to be told in 6 episodes. I think it is the end of monarchy. Yeah, that could be. If it was the end of monarchy, that would be interesting. You know, if it was reborn as a republic, I'd love to see that. Clark Savage Jr. said, who would have imagined that Doctor Strange would ever get an action figure? Well, they made a lot of Marvel action figures, but not as writ large as this Hot Toys figure is. Bartomac says, Arya will take out Dany. Killing Cersei would have resulted in her own death. Her destiny is to kill Dany. Just a thought. Could be. The Continental 89 says, Double Down is a fantastic movie. Copa says, it's time for a revolution in Westeros. Well, I think we got one. We'll see. I mean, we shall see. Well, listen, I'm going to bring this chat to a close. It was interesting. This day has been interesting. Social media has been interesting watching all of this. I don't even know what to say. I'll be curious to see where it goes. I am going to watch this episode again because, as I said, I did when it was over. It was totally unexpected to me, and I thought the feeling of it was, look, if nothing else, this last episode, the bells, I call it the bells of St. Mary's. I was joking. It cast a spell. I mean, I was entranced by it. It was unexpected. I was like, oh my God. And it was definitely unexpected. It was apocalyptic. And I didn't think that she would do what she did. I really thought that she would just run the Red Keep, just burn the Red Keep to the ground and fry Cersei. I didn't expect what happened to happen. And I don't know. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I can't wait to see. What do you guys think? Tell me in the comments. First of all, I want to thank everybody. I've got a lot of new viewers, a lot of new subscribers. And for those of you who don't know, the Post-Geek Singularity is all about sharing our ideas in a respectful, intelligent manner. And I've really appreciated, I've been getting a lot of new emails, a lot of new comments. And if you have letters you want me to read on the air, please send them to the Burnettwork.net. Tell me if you want me to read them on air or not. I keep getting great letters. I might even do another show this evening. It's interesting. I get a whole different group of people this evening because I have more letters I wanted to read that were off topic. But please keep those letters coming. Go to the Burnettwork.net. Subscribe if you haven't. And thank you to all those new subscribers. And I want to thank Lucky Tiger for sponsoring this podcast. For those men who want to look good and feel great, go to getluckytiger.com if you want to order any of their grooming products, and I highly recommend them. on checkout, punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, and you will get 20% off of your order. Thank you all again for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel. I very much appreciate it. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you need to do is listen. And that's what we're doing here, which is pretty cool. So thank you for being here. I will be back on the John Campea show tomorrow. I've come out of the rock of work so far. I've got a little bit more to do today. But I will see you on the John Campea show tomorrow, and I will be back here hopefully at 1 o'clock again. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening.